So Constitution, since we're talking about constitutional law, common law, let's talk about that. Let's talk about exactly what it is and what it isn't. How does it differ? So we hear about two documents. We hear about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those two things seem to get thrown around together a lot. Mr. Thornton, can you share any thoughts on the differences between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? We'll start in the back corner.
Constitution is just a living written document.
Yeah.
Declaration of Independence is declaring independence from the Kingdom of England.
Exactly. He said the Declaration of Independence is declaring independence for the Kingdom of England. So the Constitution is not the document that we wrote because we were upset with England saying, hey, we don't want to be friends anymore. That's the Declaration of Independence. That was us saying, hey, we're not part of you, we're independent. Obviously, there was some beef before that, and we're going to touch on that briefly. The Constitution was evolved to be the basis for laws. We don't go back to the Declaration of Independence to decide what's legal, what's illegal, what's right, what's wrong. That was just a really, really important document from us. A Dear John. Anybody know what a Dear John letter is? What's a Dear John letter? Yeah, when you break up. Back in the day, before texts, you write a letter to somebody and say, hey, we're through.
It's always quick.
Yeah. So that's what we did. We wrote a Dear John letter to England saying, we're done. So that's the Declaration, or that was the Declaration of Independence. It's not the Constitution. The Constitution is for us.
So the Declaration of Independence is a letter removing ourselves, the United States removing itself from England?
Right. Declaring our independence. Thus the name, the Declaration of Independence. We don't go to the Declaration of Independence to figure out what's legal and what's not. However, the Constitution is reviewed constantly. The Supreme Court, to this day, is still reviewing the Constitution to determine what is right, what is wrong, what's lawful, due process. Can we have this law, or should we have this law, should we not? So because of that, a lot of our laws, whether it be penal code laws, health and safety, vehicle code, search and seizure, evidence code, those have stemmed from the constitutionality of that law. Every law that's created is reviewed based on its constitutionality. And if there is a challenge to that constitutionality, it could go to the appeals court. It could go to a higher appeals court, and eventually the highest appeals court in the land is the Supreme Court. So obviously ancestors came over here to start a new colony of Britain. So we stemmed from England. When we came from England, there was maybe the relationship had some challenges when the first settlers came over here, but we were still a colony of Britain. But as things started to progress and get worse, the relationship started to degrade, then that's when some of our founding fathers decided we needed to start having some meetings and figure out how are we going to go in the future? Where's this going to go between us, the new world, the Americas, the colonies, and Britain? So one date that I would suggest you write down so that you remember is September of 1774. In September of 1774, we had our first Continental Congress. So the first meeting to discuss how bad our relationship was with England. Some of the things that came up in that first Continental Congress was a boycott. It was suggested that we stop buying British products. Now, boycotts, there's been plenty of boycotts in the news. Who can think of some? What products have been boycotted in the past? I'm having a little blank here. Anybody think of any? I'll take Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's ice cream has been boycotted in the past. They are a notoriously or historically left-leaning company, a very liberal company. Sometimes they make statements as a company, as a corporation, they make statements that not everybody agrees with, especially certain folks on the right. For instance, they took out an ad that supported somebody who's in prison, accused of killing a police officer. And Ben and Jerry's put out an ad supporting that person. They felt as though there was some evidence that showed that perhaps he didn't do it. Well, obviously, those that supported the widow of that officer and police officers in general probably took a little bit of umbrage with that. Thought, well, look at this company. How dare you? How dare you support a cop killer? Or Ben and Jerry's thought, well, we're supporting something that we don't think is a cop killer. So a little bit of a conflict there. Folks wanted to boycott Ben and Jerry's. And by boycott, if you're not familiar with the terms, we don't want to buy it. We're going to teach you a lesson by not buying your product. And that's what they were talking about in the first Continental Congress. They wanted to boycott British products. We're going to teach them a lesson by not buying any of their products. So with the Ben and Jerry's example, some folks would say, yeah, those guys are jerks. I'm not going to buy any more Ben and Jerry's. And other people would say, what are you talking about? They have a really good point. I'm going to buy more Ben and Jerry's because I really support them. But there's a third group too. What do you think the third group is?
Mediate, in between.
It is in between, not quite mediated, but I would call it more apathetic. Folks just don't care. Like I like Ben and Jerry's, so I don't care about your political stance. I don't care about what you stand for. Like I don't think anybody should get killed, but I don't think anybody should be on death row wrongly. But I'm just saying I like
Like the Seinfeld thing.
the what?
Like the Seinfeld thing.
Remind me of the Seinfeld
I
thing.
think he came out and, I mean, he had some slurry situation. Everybody was like, oh,
Oh,
you shouldn't be watching him. And he's been
yeah,
on this.
Richards. Yeah, the actor that played he wasn't. Yeah, it was on Seinfeld. He was the crazy actor on Seinfeld. I can't remember. Richards is his given name. But he came out and used some racial slurs in his act. Yeah, there's some folks like, well, you know, he should never work again. Some folks are, I mean, I'm sure, probably much more in the minority where some folks maybe just supported those slurs. But I think that, like, yeah, there are probably some folks who are like, well, he's a comic and he's trying to be funny. Maybe he said something wrong, but I'm not going to boycott the guy. So yeah, that's a good example. Thank you. So we have two terms for specifically the British boycott. Folks that supported it, folks who didn't. So if you decided that you were going to still purposely go out of your way to buy British goods, those folks are called loyalists. And there were folks that did that. Whether it be out of apathy, because I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I said out of your way. Folks who still bought British goods were called loyalists. Some of them could be because they really supported the British kingdom and they wanted to go out of their way. But some folks could have been just out of pure apathy, like, well, it's just cheaper to buy these products out. I like Ben and Jerry's. But other folks went with the boycott and said, yeah, that's a good idea. Forget them. We're not buying any more British products. Anybody read what those guys were called? I'm sorry?
Is it the Federalists or the Nationalists?
They may have been part of those groups. We call them, they assume those for specifically the boycott persons, we call them patriots. Is one of we had the patriots and loyalists for the boycott itself. The other thing that came out of that first Continental Congress is that we started getting the colonial soldiers ready. The Minutemen, we call them. We weren't really on the brink of war. We were just really discussing the beef that we had. It really progressed into the second Continental Congress, where we started really talking more and more about war. That's another date that I suggest you remember right down, May of 1775. May of 1775, we had a second Continental Congress.
And the person was winning.
September of 1774.
And what happened in May 1775?
We had our second Continental Congress. Yes. At this point, things have really reached a boiling point. We're at the brink of war. We're really discussing the revolution, declaring our independence and saying we're completely done. Before we just had beef, now we're talking about war. The Minutemen are told to get ready. Every colony is told to prepare for war, get your soldiers ready. And only about a year later did the Declaration of Independence come out. Anybody know the date for that one?
1736,
Exactly, July. July is,
July 4th.
well, that's when we, that's when we celebrate our Independence Day. So only a year later it only took a year from that Second Continental Congress, a year and a couple months, from that Second Continental Congress to actually declaring all out independence.
And that brought war. That
Right.
brought war, so.
So the document itself, as we're not going to talk, I mean, we talked about the Declaration of Independence real briefly, just as a comparison, but obviously we're going to spend a lot more time talking about the Constitution. So the document of the Constitution, as it was written, was based, as much as we don't get along with England at this point, as much as we're having beef with the British Empire, there's still our roots. There's still what we know. We came from England as a country. Obviously, not every settler came literally from England, but a lot of our history does. We had a lot of Dutch settlers, and there's obviously a lot of folks who were brought here against their will to be slaves. So, I mean, not everybody came from the British Empire, but a lot of our history comes from the United Kingdom. And there's a document that the British Empire uses as their set of laws. So we use a term in England, the British term is common law. So a lot of laws in Britain are tradition. They come from traditions, and sometimes, especially at that point, not even codified, not even written down. We're just using just tradition to enforce the law. This is how we've always done it. So this is what the punishment has always been, or this is just a common sense way of punishing somebody. We don't need it written down. But the one document that the British Empire did have was the Magna Carta from the 1500s. And that talked about things like due process. Everybody should have a fair go at it. At that point, they may not have mentioned a trial. We use it to say everybody deserves a fair trial. But back in the 1500s, at least everybody deserves a fair chance, is what it said. It didn't literally say that, but that's the point it's getting. The idea of, so what are some examples of due process today? How do we exemplify due process in our current criminal justice system?
All right, to legal representation.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, legal representation. So you have, for the most part, for most crimes, you have the right to have an attorney. There's some exceptions. If you're not aware, not every crime that you commit warrants an opportunity to be represented by an attorney. You may think of any crimes where you don't get the right to an attorney. Minor crimes. That's the easiest. Infractions, for one, you don't have a right to an attorney. You can, on your own, there are plenty of attorneys that will represent infractions. There are people that specialize in speeding tickets, but you're not going to have one appointed for you because you don't have the constitutional right or the case law. And it's not literally mentioned in the Constitution, so case law is interpreted that as being part of due process. Any crime where the exposure is less than 6 months, you don't have the legal right to have representation.
So but would that include any misdemeanors?
No, misdemeanors have exposure up to 1 year. So case law has said that if your exposure, just give me a different, it's very, very, very few crimes have exposure of less than 6 months. Most misdemeanors have that 1 year exposure. So in order to get a crime, like even your minor assaults, petty thefts, things like that, you're usually going to have a 1 year exposure. Now, does that mean you're going to get sentenced to 1 year? No. And that's how when you talk about that due process and representation, it's talking about the exposure. Like your maximum that you can get has to be less than 6 months. It's very difficult to have a crime like that because most of those minor crimes, the maximum you can get is 1 year. You have to almost be an infraction to have that exposure. Infractions, the exposure for infractions, there's usually some sort of fine. Maybe if it's a serious infraction, then it may be upgraded. It wouldn't even be an infraction when they're doing misdemeanor. Things like racing. Like technically it's in the vehicle code, you're not supposed to race each other. You can go to jail for doing something like that in some jurisdictions, but it's not because it's an infraction. Even though you're breaking the vehicle code, it's misdemeanor. Exhibition of speed, peeling out, things like that. So one of the hot topics that I mentioned it real briefly was slavery at that point. At that point, we had settlers, but we also had folks who came here against their will. Like slaves were not, I don't think you can categorize slaves as settlers. It's not like you jumped on a boat voluntarily and took a nice little princess cruise to America and become a slave. But that's a hot topic. You've got folks that own slaves and you got folks that are against owning slaves, but it didn't really become part of the constitutional discussion. Why do you think that is? Why weren't they talking about that too much?
Because slaves weren't seen as people.
That's part of it. She said slaves weren't seen as people. Eventually, there was more case law that saw them as 3/5 of a person and then a full person, yes.
And because the majority owned them. So you have the loyalists and the.
Loyal to that idea. They wouldn't necessarily be loyalists to that terminology, but yeah, they'd be loyal to that idea, absolutely. Yeah, and then we also have the folks, I'm agree with that. The folks that maybe didn't support owning slaves, but didn't want to go out on limb and denounce it either. Kind of like we talked about the not blue bonnet, Ben and Jerry's. Yeah, too much ice cream on my brain. Blue bonnet. Yes.
And also, at that point, women weren't even considered people, because the Constitution literally put it as men.
It said all men are created equal. There's some contention as to did they mean men in the generic sense, like all folks,
No.
or did they mean literally men?
Literally,
But
because women
you would
were
see by
considered-
demonstration, it appears that they meant men because
Mhm.
of voting laws, suffrage, things like that. So we've got politicians, just like today, we've got politicians. So we'll talk about our Congress people, folks what is the job of a Congress person?
Representative.
That's a really, yes, exactly. Representative. Tell me more about that.
But don't they represent the majority?
They're working
There
for
we
the
go.
people.
That's my next question. Who does your congressman represent?
The
For me.
The people.
The people.
So, Miss Scott and Mr. Thornton, I don't know how much you guys hang out away from class. And I don't know how much you know about each other's politics. But do you think, regardless of how little or how much you guys hang out away from school, do you think you agree 100% on every political idea?
No.
No? But you both have the exact same congressperson representing you. How does that work?
Every man.
How do you have the same person representing you in Congress and you guys don't have the same 100% the same ideologies?
I was saying gerrymandering, the way the geographics.
Okay, literally, yeah. But how are they going to go about representing you? How do they do their job?
They're electing.
Is it possible for them to represent you completely, each of you completely, that one person?
No,
Yes and no.
no.
It's difficult, right? So we don't have, we have that representative system. Here's a trivia question for you. United States, are we a democracy?
We are a democratic republic.
Yeah. We're not a democracy.
No.
We hear it a lot.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to downgrade or put down America. I'm saying literally, politically, as the Constitution has us, even though you hear folks say we're a democracy, we're not. We're a republic. A republic means that we don't go to the ballot box and vote on every single little thing. We have people that do that for us. People that represent us. that congressperson that we were just talking about. That's the definition of a republic. So because we are a republic, we have folks that represent us, but I just use you two as examples, but no one person in this class has the exact same ideologies as any other person in this class. You're going to have some sort of differences in political leanings. It may not go as far as what we started out this conversation discussing in slavery. But at the time, when we were having the Continental Congress discussions and talking about going to war and boycotts, there were folks that were hardcore, like, heck yeah, slaves are good, let's do it. And then there were folks who said, absolutely not, hardcore, slaves are bad, let's not do it, let's get rid of it. And then there were there were representatives, we didn't have a Congress, there were representatives, politicians that were supposed to represent them, and you got both of those guys, both of those folks in your constituency, and how do you represent them? Yes.
So I have this funny little story, it happened last week. I work at Autobahn here in Selma. And I have this one employee, and he always follows around with our managers. And so she's got like this slacky, and it was, you know, a little cute situation. And then we got this other employee last week, and he started following around a whole different person. I was like, oh man, I want one. I was like, this.
So they got their own little entourage.
Have a master spell when they see somebody else get a slave. Like, I want one too. Like, you can tell me I can come to work and he's gonna work with them.
Right?
Sure, let's get this done. So, I mean, it just occurred to me because, you know, I was at work making a joke about it, you know, but it had to be of how it was. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right. Some folks maybe were on the fence. Some folks were that Ben and Jerry's idea where, like, I don't have slaves, but what do I care? It doesn't affect me.
right.
Maybe they thought slaves aren't people, so that doesn't affect me. If you want to have a slave, have a slave. What do I care? And some folks said absolutely not, and some folks said absolutely. And we got people representing them. And it's very difficult, and that's a really contentious topic. I picked that on purpose. And as we go today, even in minor things, maybe legalization of marijuana, some people might want it, some people don't, but the same representative is going to represent both of them. So Thomas Jefferson talked about those politicians who had both sides in their constituency. He said, slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't like it, but you don't want to let go. Slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't like it, but you don't want to let it go. What does that mean? Any thoughts on what he meant by that? Kind of poignant. Yes, ma'am.
Like, slavery is like being in the middle of two different wars and just knowing, like, if you lose grip of it, that it's gonna tear you up.
Yeah. I mean, it did eventually. We had a civil war discussing, at the very least, partially discussing that topic. The idea that your constituency, you're the people you represent as a politician, if they wanted slavery and you don't, what do you think would happen to a politician that if most of the people you represent wanted slavery and you personally felt like this is a bad idea, slavery is wrong, and you acted on your personal ideas and say you represented, what would happen?
So they could possibly kick you out like, over time.
What do you think? Yeah. At the very least, come after you politically, she said. She said people are gonna come after you. At the very least, come after you politically. You're gonna be out of a job.
Yeah, you lose constituents.
If you don't support your constituents, then they're not going to support you in theory,
They're not gonna vote for you.
regardless of your ideas. I'm gonna go on a limb and say that most of us would support abolishing slavery if we were, given the option. But if your constituency doesn't want that, how much of a battle is that? If you want to continue in that realm, that arena.
No bill battle.
All right, because you already messed up, because he's already in place for you. You gotta wait till next go around and vote for somebody new.
Right? So you gotta wait and vote somebody new, which possibly could happen. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation, I would imagine. It's kind of a lose-lose situation, ideology-wise. If you go against what you feel, so in this case, your constituents want slavery, they support slavery, and you don't. And you think, well, I'm gonna stand up for myself. I'm gonna do what's right. I'm gonna do right by society, I'm gonna do right by mankind, I'm gonna do right by those slaves. And I'm gonna vote to abolish slavery. And then all the people you represent are like, forget you, man. Hit the bricks, pal. And now you're out of a job. It's not a great decision to make. It's a very difficult decision. So when Thomas Jefferson said slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears, you don't like it, but you can't let go. Because at some point it was difficult to let go of slavery. We touched on the last topic that I was going to touch already real briefly, and the idea that even though we didn't discuss in the Continental Congress times, we didn't discuss the topic of slavery, eventually there has to be a compromise if there is that much contention over a topic, right? There has to be, now compromise isn't always polite. If somebody comes to a bar and slaps somebody else's girlfriend on the backside, is there a compromise? Is there going to be an understanding on whether or not that should happen or not?
No.
Not a polite one, right? There's going to be an understanding, but it's not going to be a polite understanding, I would imagine. But, so that could be likened a little bit on a very minor scale to the reckoning that took place over slavery. The idea that there's two sides that are very, very much entrenched in this idea. And if you're so entrenched in an idea, finding middle ground is going to be very, very difficult. The compromise is not always going to be polite. And how was the compromise eventually found for that topic? There's a very major historical incident that settled this debate. The Civil War. It wasn't polite. It was like the bar situation where, if somebody gets slapped on the backside, there's probably going to be an understanding at the end of this discussion, but it's not going to be a polite one. The same thing with the Civil War. There was an understanding at the end, but we had to fight to do it. So that's an introduction to how we got to the Constitution. One last thing about the Continental Congress, both 1 and 2, they both occurred in Philadelphia. Something key for y'all to remember. That's how we got to the Constitution. That is how the Constitution differs from the Declaration of Independence. Although they're both great documents that had a huge weight and bearing on the development of our country, they are two different documents with two different needs, two different roles in the building of our country.